This video is about testing, and it follows on from the upgrade I did of a Cake 4 to CakePHP 5 with this simple application which has just got a users table and a posts table as well. The first thing we're going to do is just have a look at whether testing works or not in the current state of play. What we first want to do, just confirm that our version is version 5, and then we want to go into vendor bin PHP unit and see what the output of testing is. Now the first thing we find is that we've got some deprecations that are still causing issues, and again if we just see the error message, it says disable logging scopes is deprecated, use null instead. So going up to our configuration and into, I think it's app.local, I'm just going to search for scopes, and notice it's saying if you use false that's deprecated, use null instead. So I'm just going to change that to null, and I think that's all of them, and then just run PHP unit, and now we're down to 2 error messages, and it's basically complaining that fixtures, the property fixtures, not declared the correct type. So just clicking and going in here and saying okay, that's an array, and let's go into this fixtures file here. Actually that's also working now, so let's go and check this other one, users controller as well. So, and let's see, and it wants the same thing done for posts, and I believe there's also, if we have a look down here, it'll be the same issue for. Okay, so that's our CakePHP 5 cleanup. Now the next thing that we find is that the complaint now is that you're using deprecated schema. So what it's talking about, I believe, is in here, it's phpunit.xml.dist, and it's saying that this is incorrect. So what we want to do is copy this and then just give it that and run that schema change. So it does a backup, and then if you have a look in Git, you'll see that it's just made a heap of different changes here. Now once that's done, we're still suffering from problems here. It's saying that we're getting a redirect when we try and run our tests. So we can see each test is being run, but it's redirected, and the reason for that is we have enabled in our application authentication. So the first thing when you try to access anything, if you go pages, it will just redirect you to a login. So what we're running into is this particular error message. So how can we see that from within a test? So what we can do, if we go into the one that's complaining about, the pages controller, and just do this, we go this, get body as string, and dump and diet. So we found that it's test display. Let's just run that again and see what it does. Nothing. So we're not even getting to we're not even getting to this phase. So we need to do something in order to be able to actually successfully hit this without getting there's no response at all. It's actually a redirect before this. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we can do is authenticate. Now in our documentation, if you have a look at the actual testing documentation, and I'm just going to search for session. So it's saying underneath setting up the request, it's saying that you can set cookies, you can set session data, and in this case it's authentication information. And you can even make changes to the headers that you're sending in, so that if you need to refer a header or anything like that, you can set that up in the test, and you'll be able to properly complete the test. Now this session is what we're going to need to use all our tests, because if you notice in the application, if I'm not logged in and I want to go to posts or any other thing, it's always going to redirect me to the login. So for all my tests now, I want to be authenticated. So how do we do that in a way that's workable for all the tests in this class? Well, we can start by setting up a public function, and it's called setup. And this setup function, I believe, needs to be a void return. And then we also want to make sure, if we miss this, nothing will work, that we call the parent setup function as well. And then from there, we want to authenticate in this setup function so that every single test will be authenticated before it runs the test. So it will call setup first before every test. So now what we want to do is and we can do this just with code here. We could say this session, and then we want to say, okay, we want to get a user, grab a user from the test database. So we'd say, okay, I want a user, and I want to go this fetch table. Now the table is users, and we want to find a user, and where, so we might say, okay, I want to find from the test database the admin user, and if it's not in the database, I want that request to fail, so it'll throw an exception. And then I want to say, okay, populate the auth key of the session with that user, so it's authenticated. Now, is that going to work? Let's have a look. And well, it seems to be okay, but we've got an error message here. We're running the tests, and it's saying that the XML is wrong. So let's go back to our distribution XML and find it saying, well, element extension, it's not expected, it should be bootstrap. So what I'm going to do here, firstly, I'm going to check to see if this particular thing is correct. This is something that's done automatically, but does Cake Test Suite Fixture PHP extension exist? If we have a look under vendor, CakePHP again, src, tests, we're looking for our test here, Test Suite, Fixture. Now, does that class PHP unit extension exist? And it doesn't exist at that level, but if we go one step further, it does exist here. So there seems to be something incorrect there. So I'm just going to change this extension PHP unit and bootstrap. So change that so that works. Now, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? If you go into our testing documentation and do a search for this, it says before you can use fixtures, you should double check that PHP unit contains the fixture extension and it gives us this code, but apparently this is not correct. So I've just fixed that based on the error messages. Now let's have a look again. And now it's saying, well, record is not found in table users. So the record, what record am I looking for? Let's go back to our code. I'm looking for the admin user, and I know in my, when I log in as admin and look at the users, in my live database I've got an admin user, but apparently, let's have a look at our, we've got, if we have a look in here underneath config, app local, and we look at our data sources, we can see we've got a test database here. And if I open that in SQLite browser and have a look, we've got our users table and we've got absolutely nothing in it. Now, how is the test database configured so that it's got records that you can test against? And how does that work, just the default cake way? Well, let's have a look in the code now of our test, and we've got a bootstrap file. So every time you run a test, this bootstrap file is run. Now notice in here it sets up a few things. It sets up auto loading and a number of things to get started with testing, but it's got this migrator class and it's running. And what that migration is doing, so you can add schema a number of different ways. You can create a SQL file and load that using this schema loader, but by default this is what's being run. It's saying run any migrations to create the database. So it assumes that you've created a migration or a number of migrations and it just runs all of them. So my migration simply sets up the post table and the users table, and every time a test is run, that migration will be reversed and then it will be run again. So it'll drop the tables, I believe, and if we have a look under debug, so notice the logging here, it's saying reading migration status. So that's every time that's run, this will drop all the tables and run a migration. Now, how do I know that that's actually happening? I just want to get out of here. If I remove the tests database and run phpunit again and go back to our, you can see that though I remove the database, it's run the migrations again and we've got the tables recreated. So that's all well and good, but that database, those tables are empty. So how do we make tables that are populated? Now the first method we're going to look at is using it the old fixture way. So here in our tests structure here, we've got post fixture and we've got users fixture, but have a look at them, because at the moment they've just got information that's generic, and if we have a look at our users fixture, we can see that it's not really got information we can work with. So what we can do, if we've got some skeleton information in the database, we can just populate the fixtures with, so we can say cake, bake, fixtures. We're going to populate the fixture with information from the live or the default database. So we're going to say, I think it's records, and then we say number, I think it's 100, and then we say posts, unknown option. So I've got that wrong, so let's just, oops, let's just go and check what we need to do there. And I want to go help. Is it fixture? Alright, it is. So let's see if we got this right. Records we want, yes, and we want to count, so we can limit the number of records, but I'm just going to say 100 because that'll bring in everything, because there's only about 4 records. Do I want to overwrite? Yes. So let's see what's brought in here into our fixture. So we've got a number of records here. We've pulled those in. Let's do the same thing with the users table. And yes. And that now has records from the database. Now, if you are wanting to test or wanting to modify this sort of information, you can, in the fixture, do some things like this. So we go as key value, and we can modify the records before we actually. So let's make sure the password is something that we know. So we got default, there it is right down the bottom, default password hasher, and we want to hash the password and just make sure that the password is something we know for this. Now, so we can modify our fixtures at runtime, because it's these fixtures using the init function, that's dynamic data. So it's just going to populate this property with the information and then commit it to the database. So there we have our fixtures now using information from our live database, and that will stay static and we'll be able to run our tests again. So let's go vendor in PHP unit, and it's still saying we've got the fixtures right, but it's saying record not found in table users. So what more do we need to do to make sure that this information is being injected into our test database? Let's have a look in our PagesControllerTest here, and notice what we haven't got here is we haven't got a property that declares fixtures. So see, in the other controllers, we've got a property called fixtures, and we don't have that in our Pages controller. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in our property here. Now we don't need, for this particular one, we don't need the post fixture, so I'm just going to comment that out. Now let's see, with this, the old cake way of loading fixtures, let's see if that works. Alright, so saying we've got 2 failures, so we're getting close, and almost there. So we're almost at the point where we can PagesControllerTest, we've got 2 failures. So what's the failure? Now I'm not sure exactly why that's not working. Let's have a look at our data from our database. Looks okay, it's pulling that in nicely. Now, failed asserting that CSRFS is in the response body. Okay, it's saying, so we've still got an error of 500 between 200 and 400. Now, why is that? Let's have a deeper look at what's going on here. So again, it's saying that there's something wrong and it's dumping. So let me try this again. This get body as string may not work, but I just want to try it. Okay, it is. So this time it's returning us something, but it's an error message. So I'm just going to scroll back up and go, okay, what the heck has happened here? What is going on? I've got a whole heap of error code that's being dumped, but we should at some point get some information. Okay, so it's throwing an error. What more do we? Okay, so what error is being thrown? We'll be able to find it here in the output, or will it be better if we go logs and we go CLI error, and let's have a look and see at the bottom here. It should tell us a little bit about what's happened. You can scroll up. It's saying call to undefined method. So dumping the string to screen didn't work, but let's have a look at this one. Call to undefined method, cake database connection in that home page under pages. Okay, so what's the issue there? Well, it's the editor's complaining. It's saying this method does not exist. Now something's changed here, and now if we pass in a name and it doesn't exist, it will throw an exception, I believe. So if we go return, it throws this exception, and so this method doesn't exist. So what we're going to say is, well, we just need to say true or false for this, because we know when we connect, if we have a look at our home, pages, home. Now we can now see it in our actual default Cake instance, and it's showing us the error nicely formatted here. But notice here, if we have a look under on this page under variables, actually that's not the right place, but we definitely know that this is wrong. So what we need to do is we need to change this. So if we have a look in the code, so we go home PHP, we see that this is wrong. So we just want to, it's a Boolean, and it says it just needs to tell that page whether there's a database connection or not. Now if it throws an exception, it will skip this. So all we need to do is just basically say true, and it should start working again. So there we go. So it's now saying true, and it's the CakePHP is able to connect to the database, and that's what it uses the true for. If we have a look down here, we can say connected, I think it is, if result is connected. So it's looking for that. And the check connection does the, looks for the default connection. If it can't find it, if we change that, we can see that, that we have an issue with our database connection. But now that's working, so that should work when we run our test. So let's run our test again. And now we have a completely working test. It's only complaining about and yellow because of incomplete tests. So there we have, we're now back to the point where our tests are running and they're functioning okay. And we haven't got any error messages that we need to fix. Now the next step is we've gotten things working on using the old fixture method. So basically every time that we bootstrap and the pages controller is now set up to use fixtures. It will load the fixtures that we specify, and we need usernames so to authenticate. So we've got that working with fixtures. Now let's use a different method of loading our records into our database. So we're going to move away now from fixtures, and we're going to use seeds. So if you have a look in this application, I've got some seeds set up here. I've got the users seed, and it's got data that it inserts, and in this particular seed it will truncate the table, so you won't have collisions with IDs if you're inserting new records or records with IDs. But this seed is what we're going to now use instead of a fixture. So we can use the seeds that we create for skeleton data to test against. So now let's do that. So we go into our Pages controller, and we're going to just comment out this fixture, and now we can see that it's no longer finding the records in the database. So we're no longer using fixtures, but we're going to try and use seeds in this case. So how do we use a seed to do our testing against? Well, we can add another line of code here, and it's migrations. So let's pull that in. Now with migrations, we can have a look at the settings here, and we can say, okay, I'm just going to leave this blank to see if it works, because I haven't tried this before. But all I'm going to do is say, okay, just run our seeds, like enter. So instead of pulling in information via our fixtures, we're going to use the seeds that we've created. And it's saying record not found in table users, so that hasn't worked, so it hasn't applied to the seeds. Let's look at our setup here, and we've got here in migrations, we want to specify our test database, so let's do that. So we're going to say connection, and the database, the test database is seed. So now let's see if it now works. And it kind of does. But now we've got an issue with, we've got some fixtures being loaded and they're colliding with our migration using seed. So we might go in and then disable. So instead of, so we're going to just disable here. Let's see now if it works. Still not the case. And we need to go and do that in tables as well. So again, and we'll do it for users tests as well. So now we've just disabled fixtures completely in all our tests, and now our tests are passing because we're loading our seeds, and they are being used as the test data instead of the fixtures. But you obviously would have to have the seeds available, and you would also potentially maybe if you were doing something, you know, you would say, okay, I just want to run users seed maybe, or something like that if you want to just specify individual seeds. But you can now you run your test against your seed data, which is another way of doing it. Now a final way of adding data to your database is using something that's pretty cool, and it's, if you've used Laravel, you'll probably have done this as well, is using fixture factories or factories to create information. So that's another way we can populate data. Let's have a look at that. But before we do that, we might look at another way. It's saying here, use migration to build a test database schema. Okay, but if you're not using Cake migrations, you can hook into your migration tool of choice here to create the schema. Now it's saying here you can create it with an SQL file, but I'm just going to show another method of creating database schema in this this way of in a code sort of based way, which basically takes the tables from the default database and creates them in test and drops any in test that it finds that aren't the same as live. So this is just another way of automating creating your table so that they're the same as live. So to do that, I'm going to create in our test structure here. So I've got tests. I'm just going to create a directory named utils. And I'm going to create a file called create test db schema PHP, and it's going to be class, same name, create test db schema, and we want a namespace for this, and I'm going to use the PHP namespace resolver in VS Code to do that. And I'm just going to create one method called a public static function called run, and sort of doesn't need that, but right. So now what we're going to do is create in our this class here, we're going to actually get a reference to, and then we're going to need connection manager, so Cake connection manager, and we're going to get our default database instance. Now I don't know why I'm saying use alias as false, but just trust me on that. And then I want to get the test one. So we get an instance of the test database, and we want, for both of these, we want to just tell our editor that they're a Cake database connection, so that we can use the auto completion. And now we want to get a collection of, get the schema collection, and do the same with the test database, and then at this point we want to say, okay, what are all the tables in the live database, and what are all the tables in the test database. Now once we've done that, we just want to loop through the live tables and do some inspection. So we want to say, okay, what's the schema for each table, and describe that table. And then we want to get some create SQL. So from that schema, we want to create, and we've not got auto completion there, so it might be handy if we also specify that this variable is a cake database and schema table schema. So that should, you might have some issue there with that's better. So we want to create the SQL for the test database. So we're saying that we want to create some SQL there. Now we want to also say if the table exists in test tables, first thing we want to do is drop it. So we want to just go schema, drop the SQL for, so create the, and then and finally execute that drop code. Now it's saying that this is not correct. Now I'm wondering why that's complaining, and we need to do a for each. We don't do that. Okay, there we go. So we now have for each one of our tables in live, if it exists in test tables, just drop it. And then straight after this, I'm not going to do this all just by typing, it's getting annoying. After this, we then want to create, so we want to use the create SQL, which is an array of statements, and execute that on test to create the test databases in live. So we're now using a custom schema creator. So to do that, we want to go create test DB schema, and we want to run that. And we can see that we've pulled in that at the top here, and then we just need to see if it works still. So we're creating schema using this. If we we'll just let's delete our test database to make sure it's, yeah, so it's creating and running our tests, but using this time, instead of using the migrations, we're using something to create the schema on the fly. Now in this schema, you would probably want to do some checking for tables that you don't want to create. You'd have to do, maybe in array statements to skip tables that you don't want to mess with, or it's just fully custom. You can do whatever you like to create the test database schema, including bugging out when you don't need to create all the tables or whatever you want to do. So that's another method of running a test against schema and using your own create schema function. Now we're going to look at another way of doing our testing with data that we create using our new feature. Well, it's relatively new, but it's in the testing documentation. So if you go here, go into, so go into Fixture, creating fixtures. No, we don't want that. We want to look for factories. Fixture factories. Here it is in the documentation. So it talks about using the Fixture Factories plugin. So we'll just open that in GitHub and get our require statement, and we now want to install a Fixture Factory. Now as you install that, it will pull in the two packages, Test Suite Lite and Fixture Factories, and we're going to just look at how to get this running. So you can, instead of using seeds, you can use Fixture Factories, which are give you a lot of power to really generate data on the fly. So how do we go from using seeds? So let's comment that out, and we'll see our tests no longer have data coming in from our seeds there. And now let's look at using Fixture Factories. Now the information here says, well, have a look at the output of that to figure out what you need to do. Currently, nothing happens. Why? Because we need to, first of all, install the Fixture Factories to get it running. So I'm going to go here. I'm not sure. Setup. Let's go to Setup firstly. What we want to do firstly is add this to our Bootstrap CLI in Application PHP. So we're going to go application.src application is the path. Go to Bootstrap CLI and then load. So it only works when you're in debug mode. But there's your Fixture Factory. So let's now have a look. We've now got information, and we can see that it's basically giving us an option here, -A, and it says bake factories for all models. Okay, that sounds good. And we're going to leave it as the default because we're taking it from our live. And we also want to say include methods based on table relations, which is make things easier for us. So we're going to go bin cake, and we just have a look at our options here for Fixture Factory. So it's bake Fixture Factory, and from memory, what was it again? We want to, let's have a look at our help. It's all and -m. So we're not looking at plugins at the moment, but let's create our factories. Now let's have a look at the code for those factories because they are quite interesting. So here you see that it's just a skeleton. It's saying for the post factory, get the default table registry name. It just returns the table that this factory is going to work off, and then it's got default template. And then because I added the -m, it's saying, okay, there's a relationship. So this with users, so when you're generating data for the post, you can actually also generate data for users at the same time. Makes it very flexible. Same again for the users factory, and it's got with posts as well there. So now what do we do to make this work? Well, let's go back to the one place that we've been running our tests really from, which is under here, under pages. And we've been saying, well, we want to set up a users table here. We're basically saying we want to set up users in order for us to grab a user and authenticate against it. So how can we do that? Well, let's try. So we're going to go, what's our name of our, it's our user factory. Let's use this particular, so we're going to use user factory make. And it's got options here. It's saying that you can actually specify some of the data that you're going to pass in. So if we have a look at our migration, our user table, we've got these particular fields that we can populate. So I'm just going to go here and say, okay, these are our fields. So I want to say, okay, I'm going to create what username I'm looking for. I'm looking for the admin user. I'm going to create admin user. So give that a default. Now, we could specify everything, but let's see if we can get it to break. And now we want to set up a role as well, and that role is admin. And now let's see what happens. So let's look at the output of that. We want to use get entity to grab that, and to attempt to run our test, but we're going to unexpected variable. If we get your syntax right, it'll work. So the user factory, notice it's created our user. Now this is where you want to modify the factory here for the defaults. So you might say to yourself, okay, I'm going to specify some defaults. So the default role is going to be a user for this factory. Is super user is false. What else can we do? Let's close a few of these windows because I'm getting confused. And we'll go here and have a look at our code here. All right, so password, if we needed a password, we'd probably have to specify it as well. And we can do that in the factory here. And obviously we definitely need to maybe again make them all the same. But that then sets up defaults so that every time you call this fixture factory, the user factory, it will already populate these things. So having a look again, notice when we scroll up, we've got password, we've got username, we've overridden the role, and we've specified the username in the particular test here. So now we can comment out this dump and die statement and just have a look at, and it's saying record not found in table users. Now why is that? Well, at the moment this is actually just creating an entity in memory, and we want to write this to the database, so we're just going to say change it from get entity to persist, and let's see if it works now. It does. So now what we've done is we've created a factory user, and we don't actually need this because we're persisting it, but we've created enough for our test to pass. Now the next thing we can do as well, we don't just have to have one. We've also got this ability to call with posts, and we might want to say, okay, I want to create 5 posts with this particular factory user because it's related data. And now if we scroll up, we can see that not only do we have information based on a user, but we've also got the related data. Now with the posts, we probably want, we know our post table, if we have a look at it, it's got a, go here, we log in as user, we know we've got a title and a body, and we could then say to ourselves, okay, instead of just having nothing as a default, we can start to use, so we've got title and faker, and we want to say, okay, we want some words, and we want, let's say 3 words for the post, and as text is true, because we want it to be text. We don't want it to be an array of words. And then we want with our body, and we want it to be paragraphs, and again, let's just say 2 paragraphs, and as text again. And so now that we've got all that going, we can scroll back to our dump and die here, and we can see that we've now populated our post data with customized data here, and we can do a lot of different things. Just have a look at the documentation for CakePHP fixtures, and here we got some examples, and it goes through and it says, yeah, not only can you make things customized at the factory level, but you can also pass in a function and make random data and generate it on the fly in each one of your tests if you want to. So that's a really helpful thing. So now we've got, if we go back to our pages controller, we get rid of our dump and die statement because we don't want to look. And we're now running our tests again, but this time with a factory fixture data. Now from this, we really want to sort of go to another level if we're doing testing. We really have, we've gone to another level with going from 3 different ways. Now, can you can you also use a mix of, well, let's try that. Let's get rid of the with post factory here, and let's see if we can run our tests now and see if we can actually access post data. So I'm just going to say here posts. So I'm now saying, okay, instead of using just the fixture factory, I want to also use a fixture as well. So can we mix and match? And let's go and does that work? So can we load fixtures and fixture factories as well? And it's not going to work if I don't spell it right. Let's try that once again. And we can see as well, so that now we've got, in one case we're using a fixture factory to create a user, and we're also pulling in our old CakePHP fixture so we can run tests against that as well. And finally, we've really got the flexibility. So just recapping, your bootstrap file underneath your test directory is where you create schema. You can use migrations to create schema. You can use SQL files to do that. You can use your own custom schema creator. So that's another way. You can also use migrations. So if you've got a bunch of seeds that you've got data in, and you can use those seeds to populate your test database by specifying that you want to apply the seeds to the test connection, and that's another way. You also, in here, you've got the setup function, which needs to be, if you're doing something that's common to all your tests, you want to put things into this setup function, or call in a class that you delegate these setup tasks to. Then what else? Well, let's have a look at a final job that we want to do here, and we're going to just create some data in the database. So we're going to use the user factory. I'm going to make a user named user, and with that user we're going to add some posts, and we're going to add a title equals hello, and a body equals hello body, and we're going to then say 2, 3, 4, 5, and we want to do the same thing, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now we've got our, and finally, okay, so we've created posts. Now we want to persist them. So here we have persisting to the database. So we've created one user named user, and we're in our PagesControllerTest suite. So we want to now say, okay, this get, and we're going to, we could use this style of thing. We could say get posts index. We could do that. Well, in fact, we will. Or we could use a cake URL array as well, but let's make it really simple. And first of all, we'll start by trying to filter, and we want to test index. And actually, we might just say filter posts controller. All right. So, and it says the test did not perform an assertion. Okay, so I'm just going to say this assert response. Let's just assert that and see if. And it's saying, right, so we've got our redirect. So here we want, again, we want to, we might even pull in our user here, assign that to a variable, and say, okay, this, we want to just, session, we want to authenticate and use the user as authentication. Alright, so it's saying that's okay, and we want, maybe now we want to say this assert, so index view, response contains, and we want to say, let's look for hello 4. So finally, our test index, okay, test case controller. All right, let's narrow it right down. All right, so posts controller test case. What have I got wrong? Controller post controller. Here we go. There we are. All right, so now we've got our assertions, both they're working because it can see it. Again, we can use, if we just want to figure out what the heck's being output, so we don't have an issue there, we can dump it to page. And if we really want to get specific, so we want to make sure that the fragment's right, just copy it in and say, okay, and there we have, finally get rid of that. We're asserting that everything works, and we can see we're using our Fixture factory and generating data in a way that we can really test against authentication as well. And this has been a very rushed run through of how you can use testing in the latest version of Cake.